Yes, good evening. Scott Campbell, continuing in the series, A Christian Pastor in Quebec. It's been a while since I've had a chance to film something, but what a pleasure to be back with you. Recently in our church, we've been touching on where are we headed. Needless to say, COVID has forced all of us to ask a certain number of questions about our lives. And one of them is, well, where are we ultimately headed? What are we ultimately after in life? And last couple Sundays ago, I just had through my mind the phrase we're, we're to be after, or we're to be headed toward, focusing on becoming mature adults, mature Christian adults. People that have grown up into, as the book of Ephesians puts it in chapter 4, people who have grown up into the full stature of the person of Jesus Christ. That's where we need to be headed. And sometimes, unfortunately, as Christians, we think of only what we call spiritual growth, growing in our understanding of prayer and in praying, growing in understanding the Bible, how it's put together and what it teaches us, growing in our understanding of, say, who God is and what He desires for us. And all these things are good. But it's interesting that the idea of growing up into spiritual, or excuse me, Christian adulthood, not just spiritual adulthood, includes all of life. Jesus very clearly tells us that the greatest commandment is to love God with our heart, soul, mind, and strength. The book of Mark talks about, at least in the French version, talks about loving God with our whole being. And so we really do not want to compartmentalize spiritual growth without talking about all the growth. We want to be emotionally mature. We want to be intellectually mature. We want to be physically mature. We want to be mature in our ability to exercise our will. All of these have to do with maturity. And the Bible is very clear that, uh, being a baby in the faith is much like being a baby in the physical world. Babies in the faith maybe don't know how to feed themselves. They're not very stable in their walk with Jesus. Whereas when we grow up as an adult, we become like him. We begin to literally uh, incarnate his character, the character of Christ, such as the fruit of the Spirit. We start to incarnate love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self control. And we start to incarnate his idea of thinking and reasoning. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 14, don't think like a child, think like an adult. He says, be like a child in the area of evil. Children don't know much about evil. And so he says, be like a child in the area of evil, but in the way of your thinking, reason like an adult. All of this is important, and that's growing up to become a full Christian adult. Now, in the Ephesians 4 passage, from verses 11 to 16, in there, I believe, is a real key on how this process of growth happens. First of all, it happens together. Throughout those 5 verses from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 11 to 16, we see the idea of being together, growing together, moving forward together. And more particularly, those verses remind us that we not only need to go together and grow together, but we need people who are a step or two or three ahead of us to be influencing our lives. In fact, as we read the New Testament, what we see is it's good to have people who are ahead of us, maybe more mature, definitely more mature as Christian believers, and they're maybe older than we are physically. It's good to have peers that are at virtually the same level, probably about the same age spiritually as we are, and probably a similar status in life. And then it's good to have one or two people that we're helping, where they look to us as mentors. So if we place ourselves like on a piece of paper, on one point or looking up, we'd see our mentors, we'd see our confidants, how people calling us to come further. And they too receive from the relationship, but their job, above all, is to influence us so we grow. This is in Ephesians 4:11 and 12, where God gives us apostles, prophets, and teachers, evangelists, pastors, and and those people pour into our lives, and they too benefit. They grow as they interact with us, but generally we grow even more. And then as we share with our peers and as we help others, we are other people's mentor or confidant or discipler. This is how we grow into Christ likeness. We rub on each other, we influence each other, we share. One of our great North American strengths is our independence and our autonomy. We often say, oh, that person just pulled himself up by his bootstraps and pressed on and made something of himself. But the downside of an independence or autonomy that's too strong, that is not willing to be interdependent, is we never learn to open ourselves up to talk about our needs and how we need people to mentor us, influence us, help us. And also, we're less open to get involved in other people's lives because our thinking is everybody has to work it out for himself or herself. And that's not the way to grow into that spiritual maturity. So, just a few thoughts. Do you have people in your life that are a step or two ahead as you're in your Christian growth? Are you looking to them to grow? Do you have some peers, your teammates, you're serving together, you're laughing together, you're pushing forward together? Do you have some people that you are helping and they're looking to you? This is how we move forward and become like Christ, become a mature Christian adult.